study, I want you to go back with me to the book of Exodus, and I want to do a little bit of review where we left off a couple of weeks ago. We saw where God's law had made a complete circle, ending exactly where it began. For we saw that the law of God cannot be divided. This is why James said, "Whosoever shall keep the whole law, and yet offend in one point, he is guilty of all." And in our conclusion a couple of weeks ago, we saw that, for example, if you covet another man's wife, you have broken the first commandment because you have put that woman before God. We saw that having done that, then you set this earthly creature up in your heart as an idol, which is worshipped more than her creator, and thereby you break the second commandment. Then the third commandment is broken when you, as a child of God, a Christian, who have taken upon you the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, are now taking that name in vain by the very life that you live. And then remember that the fourth commandment calls for the observance of a holy, sanctified day, and it requires a holy, sanctified individual in order to keep a sanctified day holy, and thus you cannot keep the fourth commandment. The fifth commandment cannot be kept by one who does that. They cannot honor their earthly mother and father because immediately they have dishonored their heavenly Father by the life that they are living. And then the person who is thus transgressing the law of God is most likely dragging others down into destruction with himself or herself. Even if he's not guilty of self-murder, either way, the wages of sin is death, and the soul that sinneth it shall die. The Lord said, "Whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her has committed adultery already with her in his heart." And so if it's not another's wife but another's possession that is coveted, he still stands spiritually guilty of this law, for they have gone a-whoring after other gods. And as with the previous commandment, the thought of theft is as condemned as the actual act. And furthermore, we should never lose sight of the fact that we are not our own. We are bought with a price. Therefore, when we give ourselves over to covetousness, which will result in death, we are taking that which does not belong to us and destroying it. And anyone who lives a life in opposition to the commandments of God is most certainly bearing false witness against God and against man. And then it brings us back to the 10th. One cannot break those other 9 without first breaking the 10th and coveting that which is not theirs to begin with. So we saw before that you can't break one without breaking them all. We saw that without love, not a single one of us can keep one commandment. Amen. Because it is all through love. Only love can meet the divine commands of the Decalogue. Because as we saw, love will not allow any other God to come in. Love represents that which is the controlling factor in our lives, and thus love resents anything that debases its object by representing it with an image. And love to God will never dishonor His name. It is love for God that will lead us to reverence His holy day. And love to parents is what will cause us to honor them. And it is hate, not love, that is a murderer. It is lust, not love, that commits adultery. Love will give and give and give, but it will never steal. Love will not slander or lie, and love's eye is not covetous. And so such were the sacred precepts that we've been looking at for the last several weeks. These precepts of the Decalogue spoken amid the thunder and the flame and this wonderful display of power and majesty of the great lawgiver himself. God accompanied the proclamation of his law with the exhibitions of his power and glory in order that the people might never forget the scene and that they might be impressed with the profound veneration for the author of the law, the creator of the heavens and the earth. And God would also show to all men the sacredness and the importance and the permanence of this law. And so let's pick our study up now in Exodus chapter 20, the 20th chapter of Exodus, and starting with verse 18. It says, "And all the people saw the thunderings and the lightnings and the noise of the trumpets and the mountains smoking. And when the people saw it, they removed and stood afar off. And they said unto Moses, Speak thou with us, and we will hear. But let not God speak with us, lest we die." So the people now begin to back away. Moses, you talk to us, not God. We're afraid that if he talks to us, we're going to die. So can you imagine the majesty of what must have been taking place around that mountain? And Moses said unto the people, "Fear not, for God is come to" what? Okay, now notice it. All of this that's going on here, Moses said God is come down. He's going to test you. He's going to prove you, and that his fear may be before your faces, that you what? God's intention was that his holiness and his majesty would impress upon the people that they needed to flee from sin. Sin is the transgression of those laws just given. And this is why God spoke them. Remember, the law has not been written yet. God hasn't taken his finger and inscribed this into stone. He is simply speaking it right now to the people. And he wanted to test them to see that if they would live in harmony with these precepts. And the people stood afar off, and Moses drew near unto God. The thick darkness, and under the thick darkness where God was. The people are overwhelmed with terror. The awful power of God's utterances seemed more than their trembling hearts could bear. For as God's great rule of right was presented for them, they realized as never before the offensive character of sin and their own guilt as they stood in the sight of a holy God. And so they shrank away from the mountain in fear. And they cried out to Moses, "Speak thou with us, and we will hear, but let God not speak to us anymore, or we will die." And Moses simply answered, "Don't be afraid. There's nothing to fear here, children. God has simply come here to prove you, and that you may understand these principles and his holiness, and how God wants you to be." Remember, later, Moses is going to say to the people, through God, "Be thou holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." These ragtag people were to become like God. And this was something far beyond what they could grasp. The people remained a great distance, gazing in terror at the scene, while Moses, it says, drew near into the thick darkness where God was. The minds of the people, blinded and debased by slavery and heathenism, were not prepared to fully appreciate the far-reaching principles of these holy commandments. And in order that the responsibilities of the Decalogue might be more fully understood by these people and enforced in their lives, God is now going to give them more instructions here. And he's going to put these judgments into writing. He's going to have Moses write something down now. And these additional precepts are given in order to illustrate how to apply the principles of these commandments to their lives as individuals and as a nation. These laws that we're going to look at this morning now are called judgments, both because they were framed in infinite wisdom and equity, but also because the magistrates were to give judgment according to these laws of judgment. And unlike the Ten Commandments, they were delivered privately to Moses, who communicated them to the people. Now this section that we're going to look at, these laws are often referred to as the Book of Covenant. And it begins with verse 22 of chapter 20 here, and continues all the way through the end of chapter 23. And these judgments contain some 70 distinct laws governing their relationship and attitude toward God and their rights as individuals. The first of these laws is going to relate to servants. In ancient times, criminals were sometimes sold into slavery by judges. Other times, some cases, debtors were sold into slavery by their creditors. And oftentimes, poverty even led some people to sell themselves or their children into slavery. But the thing is, God points out very clearly that no Hebrew could be sold as a slave for life. His term of service was to be limited to 6 years. And on the 7th, he was to be set free. So let's kind of go through here and look at some of these things and see how apropos they are, and how even some of our own laws are based on this today. Beginning with verse 1 of chapter 21. 21, it says, "Now these are the judgments which thou shalt set before them. If you buy a Hebrew servant, 6 years shall he serve, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing." So regardless of how much, if you had owed money, regardless of how much or how little, the 6th year, whatever you owed was forgiven and you were free. If you were sold into slavery because of some crime, and you're going to see that this happens as we go through here, the longest you could ever be in servitude for was 6 years. The 7th you came out free. If he came in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he were married, and his wife shall go out with him. So if the husband and wife came out in together, they went out together as a family. But it says, "And if the servant shall claim, and if the master have given him a wife, and she have borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself." But now watch. "If the servant shall plainly say, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free, then his master shall bring him to the judges, and he shall also bring him to the door, or under the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him forever." So if during that 6-year period, the person has gotten married, he's got children, he likes working for this household or whoever, and he doesn't want to go out, then he can say, "No, I want to stay here. I want to stay as a servant to this person. I want to stay here with my wife and my children. I want to stay here for whatever reason." He's able to do that, but if he makes that decision, then he remains in service to that household as long as he lives. "And if a man sell his daughter to be a maidservant, she shall not go out as the men servants do." So the women were to be treated differently. "If she please not her master who has betrothed her to himself, then shall he let her be redeemed." So, you know, and we don't do much of that in this country over here, but you can it's fixed marriages, so to speak. "I owe you a lot of money, I'll give you my daughter." okay? You marry my daughter, we'll call it even. That's why guys hope they had pretty daughters. You tell your daughter and she becomes his wife, but if the guy isn't faithful to her, it says, then she can be bought back again, okay? Watch. But you cannot sell her unto a strange nation, in verse 8. You see, he shall have no power to do that, seeing he had dealt deceitfully with her. So he can tell her to some other Hebrews, but you cannot sell her into a strange nation. See, that's what Joseph's brothers did to him, remember? This was a forbidden thing. Now watch. And if he hath betrothed her unto his son, he shall deal with her after the manner of daughters. So now, instead of him marrying her, well, he's going to marry my son. She's going to marry my son. But now that isn't working out. Well, that's too bad. You're still going to have to treat her as if she's your daughter. That's one of the rules here. If he take him another wife, her food, her raiment, and her duty of marriage shall not be diminished. So if he treats her unfairly, if he goes and gets him another wife, he does something he should not do, he still has the responsibility of caring for that girl. And then he says, and if he do not these three unto her, then she shall go out free without money. In other words, if he doesn't fulfill those three obligations that were mentioned, let her be redeemed by a relative or somebody else there, or doesn't treat her as a daughter, or, number 3 down here, doesn't continue to take care of her food and raiment and so forth. If he's not going to do those 3 things, then she's free to go. She doesn't have to stay there anymore. So God is trying to give instructions on how to care for these people. You see, the Israelites had themselves been servants, and now they were to have servants under them. And they are cautious about exhibiting or indulging the spirit of cruelty and exaction from which they had suffered under their Egyptian taskmasters. The very memory of their own bitter servitude should enable them to put themselves in the servant's place, leading them to be kind and compassionate and to deal with others the way that they would wish to have been dealt with. Now, the next several verses that we're going to look at reveal that man-stealing or kidnapping, deliberate murder, rebellion against parental authority were all to be punishable by death. The holding of slaves, not of Israelite birth, was permitted, but their life and their persons were protected under this law. The murder of a slave was to be punished. An injury inflicted upon one by his master, though it was no more than the loss of a tooth, would entitle him to his freedom. So let's take a look at what God goes on and tells us here, picking it up at verse 12. He that smiteth a man so that he die shall surely be put to death. That is called capital punishment today. Most people in this world don't believe in it anymore, but it is a biblical teaching. Now watch. And if a man lie not in wait, but God deliver him to his hand, then I will appoint thee a place whither he shall flee. Now this will show up later on. God appoints places called cities of refuge, where if there's an accidental death, what we would call manslaughter or accidental homicide, then people could flee to this place for protection. God will set those up later on here. But if a man come presumptuously upon his neighbor to slay him with guile, thou shalt take him from mine altar that he may die. You see how important this is. One great place of safety was always at the altar of God. But God says if somebody deliberately goes out and takes another person's life and flees to the altar, you pull him away from the altar even, he is not to be safe anywhere. He is to be put to death. And he that smiteth his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. Wow, what would happen today if this law were enforced? How many times have you seen kids hitting on their mother or their father? I've seen them push them, bite them, slap them right upside the face. God says, and this is not talking about little kids. But I'll tell you what, if you let them do it as little kids, they're going to do it when they get to be big kids. And when a child is old enough to know better, and in the ancient Hebrew society, that child had to be trained that way, because if he wasn't, when he or she got older and did that stunt, they were dead on the spot. And guess what? Mom and Dad had to throw the first stones. So it's an awesome thing to keep in mind, that it's important that you train those children to keep that commandment, to honor you, and not to mistreat you in any way. It goes on and says, he that stealeth a man and sells him, or if he be found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death. Boy, if the world had followed that one back a couple of centuries ago, wouldn't it have saved a lot of heartache in this world? That's an amazing thing, that almost the entire world, Christian and non-Christian, was involved in this man-stealing and slavery trade. The Word of God said that what should happen is anybody that's involved in that should be put to death immediately. As soon as you find the captive man or woman in their possession, you should put them to death right there on the spot and free that person. That would have changed the history of this world a whole lot if that had been followed. Notice then what he says. And he that curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. Now, do you see how important God regards that fifth commandment? Not only don't hit them, but watch what comes out of your mouth when you talk to them. And if you're publicly caught saying something like that, then you would be put to death. I believe that's one of the reasons, friends, that even to this day, the Hebrew or the Israeli families are so tight-knit. This is something that's instilled in the family from childhood on through life. So if men strive together, and one smite another with a stone or with his fist, that he die not, but keepeth his bed. Okay, now here's a fight going on. Two guys in a fight. It's not an intentional killing of somebody. In the anger, it's a fist, or he hits him with a rock or something. And he doesn't die, but he's bedridden. He's injured. He's going to be in his bed. If he rise again and walk abroad upon his staff, then shall he that smote him be quit. Only he shall pay for the loss of his time, and cause him to be thoroughly healed. You see. So if you injure somebody, you're responsible. You cover all of his medical expenses and his loss of time and any other penalties that the judges may put upon you. But those two were required. But if the man dies, then it's a different story. If a man smite his servant or his maid with a rod, and he die under his hand, he shall surely be punished. Now, even if you have a servant, think back of what happened in the past just in this country. You get mad at your slave, you could kill your slave. God says if you did, you should die. And do you know what, friends? Those that did shall. They shall. Unless they have repented of those sins, they shall die what is called the second death. So he says, you got a servant and you hurt that servant, you kill him, you'll be punished. But he says, notwithstanding, if he continue a day or two, he is not punished, for he is his money. Now here's the difference. Something happens, the slave gets injured in the ruckus. Then he lives for a while. Then it's an indication you weren't intending to kill him. He did belong to you. And keep in mind, as we're looking at this, God nowhere says, I command you to have slaves. He says, if you've got them. And everybody in the world did back then too. These people had been slaves for 400 years themselves. But if you got it, there's certain right and wrong ways of treating him. If he continues and he lives on, then you're not going to be punished because it is your money. It's a possession. But here, watch this one. If men strive and hurt a woman with child, so that her fruit depart from her, and yet no mischief follow, he shall be surely punished, according as the woman's husband will lay upon him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. Now, we looked at this a few weeks ago, just in looking at some of the things in the commandments there. So if there's two guys fighting and a woman standing by her, she tries to get in like some women do and break up the fight, and she gets hurt and she has a miscarriage and her fruit depart, but the baby lives, there's still going to be a fine. There's going to be a punishment inflicted by the woman's husband, and a fine will be set by the judges. And if any mischief follow, then thou shalt give life for life. In other words, if the baby dies, then it's to be treated as murder. Or even if the woman dies, it is murder. Okay, a life for life. So he says, then thou shalt give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burning for burning, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. If a man smite the eye of his servant, or the eye of his maid, that it perish, he shall let him go free for his eye's sake. So, you are a servant, and something happens to where the master puts out just one of your eyes, you're immediately to be set free. Now watch, that goes even further than this. And if he smite out his manservant's tooth or his maidservant's tooth, he shall let him go free for his tooth's sake. You see, even if you lost a tooth, you know, how many people would have been set free in our past history just from this thing alone? It's just amazing how man treats their fellow man. Without the governance of God in their lives, we are the most corrupt things on this planet. He goes on and says, now watch this very closely here. He says, if an ox gore a man or a woman, that they die, then the ox shall be surely stoned, and his flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be quit. Okay, so an ox gores somebody. A bull gets after you, and it gets you. Now, it says that if the person dies, you've got to stone the ox, but you can't eat the ox. Why not? I want me to make you think for just a moment. Bring you back here. Why can't you eat the ox?
Because it wasn't killed properly.
It wasn't killed properly. No big deal, is it? I mean, it's easy to figure out. You stone an ox, you might have your automatic meat tenderizer, but all that blood's still going to be in there, you see. And on top of that, because of what the ox did, to impress upon the people the fact that life is very sacred. But if the ox were wont to push with his horns in time past, so this bull or whatever was known to do this in the past, and you know there's a lot of people that have bulls like that. My uncle had a couple of those things. And always told me, Joe, don't go out in that pasture where those bulls are there. I could go through some of the other bulls, all the steers, all the cows, everywhere else. But he had a couple out there you didn't want to get in with. I think I mentioned before to somebody, might have been here, that I was riding, whenever I did have to go through there, I always went out on a mule and never on a horse. For some reason they didn't bother the mules as much as they did the horses. So he says if this bull has been used to doing that, known to do this, and it's been testified to, and the owner's aware of it, and he's not kept him in, but that he hath killed a man or woman, the ox shall be stoned, and then look at this, and his owner shall be put to death. And if there be laid on him a sum of money which shall give for the ransom of his life, whatsoever is laid upon him. So it carried the possibility of a death decree. or the judges, given varying circumstances here, could impose upon him a heavy fine. But it could carry with it the death penalty. And whether he has gored a son or has gored a daughter, according to this judgment shall it be done unto him. If the ox shall push a manservant or a maidservant, he shall give unto their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. And if a man shall open a pit, or if a man shall dig a pit and not cover it, and an ox or an ass fall therein, the owner of the pit shall make it good, and give money unto the owner of them, and the dead beast shall be his. Wow, isn't that great? You get to buy a dead animal and then figure out how to get it out of the hole. But you see, he's saying, watch out for the safety of other people too. If you're digging a hole, a cistern or something, make sure you they cover them with flat rocks. If you're going to have a veranda thing on the roof of your house, put a railing around it. Like I mentioned a while back, if you've got a swimming pool, you put a fence on it. Make sure somebody doesn't get in there to get hurt. And if one man's ox hurt another's, that he died, then they shall sell the live ox and divide the money of it, and the dead ox also shall they divide. So two animals are getting in a fight. One bull kills the other bull. Well, they sell the live one, split the money, and then they split the dead one too. Or if it be known that the ox has used to push in time past, and his owner had not kept him in, he shall surely pay ox for ox, and the dead one will be his. So if it's one that's been doing this before, you give a man another ox, and you keep the dead one. Takes care of that problem. And see, these were things that when problems like this were arising in the nation, they knew, the judges knew how to rule on something. God gave them all of these judgments to know exactly how to rule on this. And so, as we take a look at what's going on here, we find that these verses are portraying how to deal with conflicts that arise between one another. In verse 20, let's look at verse chapter 22. If a man steal an ox or a sheep and kill it or sell it, he shall restore it what? Okay. Now you see, in this country, you steal a cow, you got hung. You steal a horse, you got hung. But the penalty that God put down was not to kill people for that. You steal one horse, you replace it with 5. And there were different things. He's talking about sheep and oxen here. But 5, now notice this, 5 oxen if you steal one, and 4 if it's a sheep. They're not worth quite as much, so the penalty is not quite as strong. And then here's one that's very significant. If a thief be found breaking up, or actually breaking in, and be smitten that he die, there shall no blood be shed for him. In other words, if a thief breaks into your house at night and you kill him, you're innocent. No questions asked. Just the fact that he was in your house at night justifies him being put to death. But it goes a little further. If the sun be risen upon him, there shall be blood shed for him, for he should make a full restitution if he have nothing. Then he shall be sold for his theft. So if it's in the daylight, it's a little bit different. You catch him, you get the stuff back from him, and then he makes restitution, or you've got the right to sell him and make money to get your possessions back. But you don't kill him, because there is not that great danger that there is. You know, if I have a choice of somebody breaking into my house at night when I'm in bed or when I'm sitting in my front room, I'll tell you which one I'd take. You see, this is what it's saying. When they come in at night, there's a good chance that they will, if not intentionally, will end up killing you in your house at night. And so it protected people when they were sleeping in the safety of their home. But in the daylight, you're not justified in doing it. If it does happen, you go before the judges, and then it may become one of those justifiable homicides. But you can't just kill him and think you're getting away with it. If the theft be certainly found in his hand alive, whether it be ox or ass or sheep, he shall restore double. Okay? If a man shall cause a field or vineyard to be eaten, and shall put his beast that shall feed in another man's field, of the beast of his own field and the beast of his own vineyard shall he make restitution. So your cow gets out and goes into the other guy's cabbage patch. Guess what? You pay for whatever your cow eats out of that cabbage patch. But you are responsible for what your animals do. You see, there's that application today for people that have these dogs that attack people. The responsibility doesn't lie just with the dog. The dog is supposed to be put to death. And the person is to be responsible and can be charged with manslaughter or even sometimes murder when they sick these dogs on people. So you're responsible for that, and you make restitution. If a fire breaks out and catches in the thorns and stacks of corn and standing corn and so forth are burned, you that made the fire must make restitution for what was destroyed by your negligence there. And if a man shall deliver his neighbor money or stuff to keep it, and it be stolen out of the man's house, if the thief be found, let him pay double. If the thief be not found, then the master of the house shall be brought to the judges to see whether he have put his hand unto his neighbor's good. So you see, you're watching something for somebody, and it comes up missing. It's easy to say, oh, well, somebody came and stole it. And it may be true. And if they find the thief, then the thief must make payment. But if there's no thief around and no evidence that somebody broke in, you go before the court. And now the judges determine whether maybe you just took these things and used them for your own. And it will be according to whatever the judges determine here. Then he goes on and says, all manner of trespass, whether it be of ox or ass or sheep, raiment, or any manner of thing lost which another challenges to be his, the cause of both parties shall come before the judges, and whom the judges shall condemn, he shall pay double unto his neighbor. If a man deliver unto his neighbor an ass or an ox or a sheep or any beast to keep, and it die not or be hurt or driven away, no man seen it, then shall an oath of the Lord be between them both, that he had not put his hand to his neighbor's goods, and the owner of it shall accept thereof, and he shall not make it good. And if he be stolen from him, he shall make restitution unto the owner thereof. But if it be torn in pieces, then let him bring it for a witness. So now something's killed it. You bring it in for a witness, and he shall not make good that which was torn. And if a man borrow aught of his neighbor, and it be hurt or die, the owner thereof shall not and the owner thereof be not with it, he shall surely make it good. But if the owner thereof be with it, he shall not make it good, for it be an hired thing, it came for his hire. Do you see that? You borrow something from somebody, and something happens to what you borrow, you're responsible for it. But if the person you're borrowing it from is with you, then you're not responsible for it. That's what he just said. Why? You're together. The man who owns it still got control over it. It's for hire type thing. So there's a difference. You go out and you borrow somebody's mule to plow a field, and the mule breaks its leg, you're responsible. But if you hire the neighbor to bring his mule over and help you plow the field, then if the mule breaks its leg, it's a different thing, you see. So all of these little bitty things that help these judges see what's going on. If a man entice a maid that is not betrothed and lie with her, he shall surely endow her to be his wife. So be careful of your immorality there, fellas, because God says if you do that, you're going to marry the girl. Today, it's a whole different way of thinking here. And if a father utterly refuse to give her unto him, he shall pay money according to the dowry of virgins. So now daughter's gone out with some guy that is a real bum, and dad says, I don't care what you guys done. You're not becoming part of this family, buddy. You're not getting my daughter. But you will pay. And there will be a fine imposed here, it says. And then watch how strong it gets next. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. Boy, how many people would die today if that one were enforced? And, you know, they just go into some television stations and wipe out most of them. You know, a lot of their programs. These things are things that are contrary to Scripture. And yet we have Christians, even remnant Christians, who get involved with these witches and soothsayers and necromancers and these type of things here. And they watch it on television, they read it in the papers, they buy their books. God says you shouldn't even allow